Well, hello, I'm here with Doug to talk about vulnerable Yubikeys and other stories. It is Friday, September 6th, 2024. And so I'll start with the main one, I think, which is a very surprising story to me. Yubikeys are the hardware tokens used for FIDO2 two-factor authentication. They're used by governments and all kinds of companies for high security, and they're supposed to be very reliable, and they have an enormous defect. Every YubiKey older than a couple of months, back for 14 years, and every related product leaks out the secrets. They implemented, they had to do a modular inverse as part of the calculation for elliptic curve cryptography, and they used the Euclidean algorithm, the extended Euclidean algorithm, to find the modular inverse, but they implemented it without making it fixed time. So there's a time side channel, different keys take a different amount of time to calculate that inverse. Now, it's not a simple attack. You have to have $11,000 worth of hardware, open up the case and connect to it and can measure the radio emissions, but they're able to, in a matter, depending on details, from a few minutes to a few hours, they're able to extract the secret key, which is exactly the whole point of the YubiKey, is nobody's supposed to be able to get the secret key. So I think this means a casual home user that's just securing access to their email can probably ignore this, but all their primary customer base, I think, is companies that are trying to secure high important things like administrative consoles to financial control panels and things like that, and government and all those people are going to have to replace their keys. The firmware cannot be upgraded. They need to throw away their YubiKeys and all related products because that's in
Oh
the
no.
fundamental chip they all use. So that's why I say this is a huge story. Everybody's been trusting these things, and they have a serious flaw. It's ridiculous.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's been
So,
there for 14 years and nobody found out. And they mentioned that the company makes it really difficult to do reverse engineering. The stuff is like locked up and proprietary, and you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement to get access to it and all that. And probably, I imagine that made it more difficult to discover the flaw.
yeah, so this is something, the Yubikey
Yeah,
has been around for what, 15 years?
a long time. They say they've been around, yeah, 14, 15 years. And I remember they're the standard. I remember trumpeting
Yeah.
this all over the news when Google said about 8 years ago, we switched to two-factor authentication with these USB keys. And after that, we never had a phishing attack succeed again. So they were the champion of going to two-factor authentication, which was, of course, much better than single-factor authentication. But apparently it
Right.
had this weakness all along. Nothing's ever
Yeah.
perfect.
So, Sam, I think it's fair to say this type of attack, as you said, needs tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment.
Yeah, it
For
reminds me of the cold boot attack against Windows BitLocker, which also you can get in, but it's pretty difficult and expensive. It's not something a casual hacker would do.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm getting at. For the vast majority of people out there,
Yeah,
they're not susceptible to it. Do you also need physical access to the
yeah,
YubiKey?
you do. And so,
Ah,
so
okay.
I mean, even with all these defects, it's probably better than like SMS-based two-factor authentication, which
Oh,
people
absolutely.
use.
Yeah.
So, the point is single-factor authentication is what we've been used to for years. That means there's a pretty high chance that your account is secure, and adding any kind of second factor makes it much more secure. And the YubiKey is a better second factor than SMS, but it's not quite as good as they thought. It reminds me of the RSA breach. It was maybe 15 years ago. Everybody had these RSA tokens, and I think the Russians hacked in and got the master key, and they were able to, so they had to replace them all physically. And at that time, they wouldn't admit exactly what went wrong, but they said, we will replace all of your physical tokens for free if you sign a non-disclosure agreement. So the big insurance companies and government agencies presumably did
Yeah.
that, and the details of what went wrong never came out. But it's a disaster for the company. I mean, they're going to clearly, well, I don't know if YubiKey's going to pay for it, but I think every big organization is going to have to buy a whole new pack of second factor tokens.
Well, let's kind of look through this for a second. Um, somebody would have to steal a token.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is if you're a
Yeah.
big company and you have like a military contract,
Yeah.
then they're going to require a certain level of security. And you
Yeah.
probably
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
bragging,
Yeah.
you're probably going to have to replace them in order to meet your compliance uh, guarantees that you can't be using known vulnerable hardware tokens at your company if you're going to make be big business and have deals with people who are worried about security.
Yeah. But again, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
You're correct. When it comes to security, you want the best, but
And
or
also,
at
you
least
can't keep using something after a flaw is disclosed.
yeah, yeah, true. And there might be additional flaws and it might become easier. But for right now, somebody would have to steal the key.
Right.
And don't they also have to know some like a password or something to access the
Yeah.
key?
Well, yeah, all they're going to get is the second factor. So
Right.
they'd still have to find your username and password some other way with phishing or with
Yeah.
some of these dumps. So that's why
Yeah.
the risk is not huge, but you
But
wouldn't
it's not zero.
yeah, and you wouldn't have a YubiKey unless you were handling something really sensitive, probably.
Yeah, well, Steve Gibson, as I recall, really promoted Yubikeys about 10 years ago.
Well, you're certainly a home user to have
Yeah,
a YubiKey would be promoted up to like a corporate level of security, which is far better than the average home user.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but I mean, most people probably have them for work, and
Right, right.
your work probably really wants to tell the government, we made sure everybody has a secure key.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Um,
yeah. Anyway,
yeah, again, I think for the majority of people, even companies, it's not going to be worth it for an attacker to go in there, depending on the company, obviously. It's a
yeah,
risk analysis
that's
that
right.
somebody has to make. Yeah.
That's
All
right.
right.
Yeah.
So here, let me, I've got one story here. I'm gonna
Mhm.
pause
Yeah.
and go to my first one,
Yeah.
which is Biden's to provide high-speed internet to all. The other one, I hope people stay around with because this is really a troubling story, especially because we had a shooting just the other day at a school
Yeah.
that took the lives of two teachers and two students and injured many others.
Yeah.
And this, I'm wondering, let me pause on that one. Let's talk about Biden's plan. This is kind of interesting because I was listening to a story in Tennessee, or no, I believe either Tennessee or Kentucky. They're beginning their rollout plan. They have $1 billion to provide internet to all. And I believe it's Kentucky, which is still pretty rural. In other words, it's kind of like California if you go to the Central Valley or up in the Sierras or Northeast California, where few people live and there's lots of land. And they are finding that to provide high speed internet to people's homes, any idea what the cost on this might be for some homes in a rural setting?
Well, probably a whole lot unless you use Starlink.
Yep, and they're not using Starlink.
That
It's
means you have to
fiber,
lay like 100 miles of underground cable, right?
yeah, or telephone poles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've come up with price tags of $50,000 per home,
Yeah.
which is probably for some of these homes the value of the home itself.
You know, you could just have like 10 people share a Starlink and you'd be a lot better off.
Well, if you're in a rural part, right, your neighbors might be 10 miles away.
Yeah, yeah. Even
And
one Starlink is about $120 a month, which is pretty
yeah,
bad.
yeah,
But like I don't know, maybe subsidizing half of that would be a better solution.
yeah,
Or building community antenna TVs to send it by microwave. You know, it
yeah,
seems
yeah.
like there's got to be a better solution.
Well, they're doing fiber to the home, and like I say, that's the news story. It's they're estimating costs of $50,000 and months just to get to one home.
Well, you know, this
But
is the problem with America. We're all spread out. Like if you were
right,
like South Korea or Japan, everybody's crowded into cities, so you can get high-speed internet to it much cheaper.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it'd be quicker. Anyway, I don't know, I was surprised that they're spending that much money, but again, I think it's Kentucky, Tennessee, one of those two are still in the research phase. But they're getting ready to spend money. So we'll see what happens. What's your next story?
Yeah, I just want to say some things about this one. I read about this, but
Sure.
this is a 2021 infrastructure bill that funded this. It's been 3 years and they still haven't had any rollouts because I think the problem is competition. I think it's always the same. I remember this happened in San Francisco. The government was going to roll out either fiber or free wireless to everybody. And the problem is, if the government gives free internet to people, then it's putting internet companies out of business. And that is illegal. I mean, you tax
Yeah.
companies, then you take the tax money to make a rival product and put them out of business. That's like communism. That's and and they do have strong objections to you giving people free internet. The internet companies want to sell internet.
Yeah.
If you're going
Well,
to nationalize the internet industry and declare them a state resource and no longer let private companies run, you could do that, but not in America. That's pretty un-American.
Sam, though, San Francisco did it with water.
Yeah, well, I
If
mean, there is, I guess it's possible, but there are significant legal obstacles, and I think that's what's holding it up.
Yeah, yeah, okay, maybe. I didn't look in that much depth.
And
You
those
know, li
objections are not stupid.
Yeah, yeah. So San Francisco is a desert, and there are only a few natural water supplies.
Yeah.
And that's why they built Hetch Hetchy. That's why they were going to also dam Yosemite Valley.
Right, but I think the water is provided entirely by a government agency, right, or heavily regulated like the electric industry. It
Yeah.
basically is part of the government. That's essentially been nationalized or
What,
organized by the government, controlled by the
what,
government.
well, in San Francisco, it's San Francisco Power and Water, is it not?
It's PG&E for electricity, and I don't know about who does water.
Yeah, well, I think PG&E supplies it, but the city sells it. I'm not entirely possible
Well, and I've
or
seen all
positive.
these. I know Texas made their own electric grid, and I keep seeing proposals to make
Yeah.
smaller scale electric grids to try to bring the price down. Although in Texas, it wasn't a big success because they saved so much money, it went out in the cold weather, and that's not good.
Yeah, so I know a little bit about San Francisco and water, and what happened was back in Gold Rush or after the Gold Rush, there were so many people there that San Francisco didn't have enough water, and there were a couple water companies that were gouging people, and they had to import water from Marin County by
Sure.
ship in barrels at the
Yeah.
time. And about 100 years ago, people said this is enough, and they formed the San Francisco, whatever it is, water company.
Yeah.
And now that's why the city runs water right now.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you could argue that these things shouldn't be run by private industry just trying to maximize profit because
Yeah.
they're too important. Anyway, but
Yeah. It's a basic necessity for people. Internet, I would argue, is probably as well.
I know, I think it is these days. So yeah. Anyway, but there's certainly
Yeah.
it's a big change in the legal structure to move from private
Right.
companies selling
Yeah.
internet to the government saying it. It's not something you can just do with one bill in Congress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Sam, what's your other story? I want to save this other one for last,
Sure,
if
sure.
that's
Well,
okay.
Iran has had a huge attack on their banking sector where somebody hacked all 20 banks and threatened to dump all the data and completely crash the economy unless they paid the ransom. And after negotiating it down, they did pay millions of dollars of ransom. And apparently this has happened a lot. Their stuff gets hacked like crazy. And they tried to cover it up, but it's leaked out that the government did in fact pay millions of dollars in ransom because they could destroy the whole economy. So that's pretty harsh. And
Interesting.
and I got another one that's all over all
Okay.
of mainstream news now, of course, which is the Merrick Garland and the U.S. government is punishing a company, I think in Tennessee, and in two individuals involved in this, and running out like arrest warrants for a whole bunch of Russians who were running political disinformation campaigns in America. And what they
Yeah.
did this time is pretty smart. Instead of having like AI or something write posts to put on Twitter, which is the old-fashioned technique from like the Russian business network, they just funded right-wing media, people who made like right-wing videos, they just paid them like $100,000 per video or $400,000 a month to make videos. People who were already making alt-right stuff saying Ukraine is our enemy, it's full of Nazis, we should just let Putin do whatever he wants. There's a bunch of right-wing people in Donald Trump's orbit that are saying that stuff anyway, so they just paid them to keep saying it.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
Americans and they had millions of real followers, so they were able to push their influence
Agen-
here.
yeah,
And
their agenda.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
an interesting way to perform propaganda. Instead of writing it, you just reinforce the locals that are doing it. It would seem much more effective. And this makes
Yeah.
me wonder, when Netanyahu came to speak to Congress and all these protesters were saying, you got to stop killing the Palestinians, he said, those people are funded by Iran. And I said, oh, that's ridiculous. And now I'm thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't just jump to saying that's ridiculous.
No, I don't think you should. I think you'll find that there are some billionaires that are backing this in the US and they have a different agenda
Yeah.
than in, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So foreign money is in fact pouring in, affecting our politics in ways that are hard to believe. It makes me think of like Joe McCarthy saying there are all these communists funded by Russia. And I'm like, oh, you're just making that up. And well, maybe not.
Well, I think he was, but I think
Yeah.
now the world has changed because in order to get the word out before, you had to have a newspaper, radio, TV station, or
Yeah.
to have a mouthpiece like that. Now you just have Twitter. You just get on the internet, and
Well,
you can have one person
yeah.
who has a lot of followers, that their voice gets amplified, magnified.
Well, you remember in the early 90s when the internet came out and we all said, this will be great. Instead of having
Yeah,
just three TV channels controlling everything, everybody will be able to broadcast directly out there. And therefore, we'll have the real truth,
yeah,
utopia of like good, accurate information. And that's not quite how it turned out.
no, yeah, yeah. No, but it's interesting because you're right. Now we finally have exposed this, and I think hopefully it's a good lesson for people.
I guess. Anyway,
Yeah,
why don't you go on to your story?
yeah. So this one caught me kind of by surprise. I wasn't aware of this, and there's a little backstory. So as I mentioned before, we just had a shooting in the U.S., and I think it's kind of interesting because I heard a stat that if there's a silver lining to the shooting, it's that school shootings are down by 50% this year compared to last year. So that is pretty amazing. So it's about one per day or 1.5 per day shootings. And I assume we're talking school days. So anyway, there's another story kind of related to the Russians. And Sam, I'm wondering if you've heard of this. There was a boy who committed suicide as a result of social media, which is tragic. And we've talked about this before. But if you dig into the story a little bit deeper, the boy committed suicide because of a chatbot. And the chatbot had been harassing him and specifically asking questions about questioning his sexuality. And this was kept secret. And I'm not sure what chatbot he was using or what organization, or actually, I do. I think it was part of Instagram, although I need to fact check that just to make sure,
That's what I'd be
just to
interested,
be
but I can
clear.
certainly understand that if they trained it on like Reddit or Twitter data. They
Yep.
would learn that kind
Well,
of conversation.
but so there's a lawsuit that's going on. And what happened is, I believe it was Instagram. Again, let me fact check that. And the parents had closely monitored what internet acts or what internet sites their son was going to, and they thought that Instagram was Facebook was safe enough. But what they didn't know was that there were some partner agreements that once you were connected with Instagram, that gave you access to other sites that the parents didn't want their son to have access to. And the other thing they did was they waited until their son got to high school before they allowed him to have a cell phone and get on the internet. And again, they closely monitored it, monitored what sites they were going to. But in court documents, in the lawsuit that's going on, it was revealed that the company had trained a chatbot to specifically question kids' sexuality, younger kids, in an effort to have them engage with the site longer to get more advertiser money.
Oh my God. This is
You're
just like,
following this story,
yeah.
right?
So this is why the point is they probably just wanted to optimize engagement and therefore
Correct.
went for the most incendiary stuff. This is like
Correct.
YouTube recommending Nazi stuff because of course it gets people angry. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, but this goes to kind of a core value of a teenager
of course.
that's going through adolescence. And I mean, this has to be the most evil evil way of doing this.
Of course.
And it's incredible because they also in court documents, when the CEO or some of the high level people, found out about this, they laughed at it.
I can't imagine anybody laughing when your product does something like that. I'm an AI consultant, and I tell them
Yeah.
you really have to have monitoring of the errors. So if it starts doing something horrible like this, you'll notice and stop it. I mean, I would be horrified if I made any product that started doing something like that.
No, it it didn't start doing something like that. It was instructed to do something like that.
Well, then the
This was
people,
this
then you
was
can,
not this is not accidental. This is intentional.
wow, they actually
Yeah.
deliberately programmed it to hit those buttons. They're insane.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's like effectively murder or something. People should go to prison for this.
Yeah. Yeah. One would think. I mean, they're using this tool.
Oh, you're out of your mind. This is no way to make money.
Right. So, when this was brought up with Facebook, and again, I think Instagram, Facebook,
Yeah.
I need to fact check this a little bit more, but they kind of ignored it. Like, oh, no big deal.
Well, I know
And
Facebook did ignore their warnings about affecting teenage girls with like the eating disorders and stuff. They studied and found out it was true and then just ignored it because it made more money.
right, right. So this
Similar
is the
kind of thing.
same
Yeah.
thing to another level.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they are getting sued right and left for that.
Right, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting, and I never would have thought that we would have stooped this low. The companies would stoop this low.
Yeah. I mean, you would think they have so much money. You can afford to be a little bit moral and accept a little less money. You don't need to be totally evil just to get more money. And it's not even going to make more money. You're just going to get sued and shut down when you do things this horrible.
Well, but only if you get caught.
How could you not get caught? I mean, there's nothing more emotionally incendiary than messing with people's children's. Parents will find out and they will get really, really mad. You can't imagine you can get away with this.
But Sam, what's the penalty?
It's about the worst penalty our society has. Boy, anything to hurt kids, parents come after you with pitchforks. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, but Sam, I mean, if you've trained a chatbot to do that,
yeah,
what's the penalty to these executives or to the company?
I think I would imagine they'd both be harmed in great ways, prosecuted, probably jailed, and have the company shut down. I would hope so. I guess we're going to.
Well, yeah, so we'll see on that, but I don't think so. This is currently a civil case. And just to kind of a tangent on this, since we're touching on the legal criminal side,
Yeah,
when PG&E's tower up in Paradise caught fire,
right.
and there were 80 people that were killed
Yeah,
because of lack of maintenance by PG&E on that tower to,
yeah.
to maintain it, the Butte County District Attorney brought murder charges against PG&E, and they were going after the executives and for second degree murder, probably second degree murder.
Man.
I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but that case was going forward until executives got immunity. There was some other case that found them that they couldn't be charged. Even though a corporation is an entity, they're not really held responsible
Yeah.
criminally, I guess is the way to phrase
No,
this.
I think that's the whole point of corporations is to avoid legal liability for what happens. It's a separate entity. You're right.
Yeah, but this is criminal liability, not
Yeah.
civil liability.
Yeah, I have no
So,
idea how that works.
yeah, so here I think this sets a precedent.
Yeah.
As I'll say that, where even though a corporation is an entity, is considered under the law like an individual, it can't be held liable on a criminal charges.
Yeah. Well, if you could find documents like emails showing that they actually deliberately built this feature into that chatbot, I think they could be criminally prosecuted for that. That's unthinkable. I mean, I could imagine the
Yeah.
product having a defect that you didn't see coming, but deliberately planning a product to harm children in this way is insane.
Yeah, I'm gonna do again. I just stumbled across this story.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a little bit more research on this.
Yeah.
But again, this is like the lawmaker out of North South Carolina whose son committed suicide. Those were a couple individuals that were taunting the kid over his sexuality.
Well, I remember there was a woman that did this years ago, I think in Kansas or someplace. She found
Yeah,
out her her so hated the neighbor, so she posed as a girlfriend and taunted the neighbor until he committed suicide. And I think they
yeah,
ultimately decided that she couldn't be prosecuted for murder for that because it wasn't really exactly her fault. All she did was talk. She didn't like pull
yeah,
out a gun and shoot somebody, and that's not murder. If you like harass someone until they kill themselves, it's a lesser crime,
yeah, yeah.
like like harassment or something.
God, yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess it's a thorny matter.
It is, and this is something that I'm kind of more interested in about.
Yeah.
So I need to do a little bit more research. Maybe by next time I'll have some more information for us, more
Yeah.
concrete.
Yeah, well, I got a last one that's much simpler, which it kind of made
Okay.
the Fedora 41 is about to come out with the latest version, but they're held back because I didn't know this. Fedora supports many hardware platforms, and they don't release the version until they get it working on every platform, and they're having great trouble getting it working on the Raspberry Pi 4 for a pretty interesting reason. I didn't know this. Raspberry Pis do not have a real-time clock at all. So when they first boot up, the clock sets to some random time, which might be like 1970, and therefore all the signatures will not validate on all the signed software in your secure boot process. So that they're having great trouble with this. And the problem is when Raspberry Pis go to sleep, they can't wake up for this reason. So that's an interesting kind of flaw to have. And it's very hard to see how to get around it, except to turn off all secure booting. And you probably don't really want to make a product anymore. It doesn't have a secure boot. Anyway, they're trying to figure that out.
Couldn't they add a daughter board with a real-time clock?
Well, they could, but then they're not supporting the Raspberry 4 hardware. You have to modify the hardware to install
Yeah,
this,
I see.
which
I
is what
see.
I would probably do. I would probably say, all right, we don't officially support the Raspberry Pi. This thing is too stupid to be a computer. If you want to install it, then you have to install like the hacked version, which we don't support. But
Yeah, yeah.
maybe that's what they'll do. But apparently they really want to figure out how to support the Raspberry Pi. And that's a pretty serious defect. I didn't know there are any computers that don't even have a real-time clock. That seems like a pretty important thing to have.
Well, I would argue it's probably cost savings.
Oh, yeah, they probably saved 50 cents.
Not even, but yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, anyway, I thought
Yeah.
that was kind of amusing. All right. Well, I think
All
that's,
right. Well, that's it for me.
yeah, that's it for today. Have another one of these things on Tuesday.
Sounds good.
All right.